I'm Reg Harbeck, and today I'm here with Saurette, who is the principal and president of MainTegrity. He has been active in cybersecurity and mainframes for over 30 years, and as it turns out, he and I have both been based in Western Canada during that time. Welcome, Al. Tell us, Cure for Ransomware. What is that all about?
Well, I'm sure everybody that would tune in would understand that there is no one cure for ransomware. But, today I really want to talk to you about our product, and we think it brings three gigantic steps in the remediation, but mostly in the prevention of ransomware to begin with. So as an industry first, we detect malicious encryption instantly, or at least in the first couple of seconds when that's taking place. We can determine what's malicious and what's desired encryption. That capability is excellent for ransomware avoidance because everybody pretty much equates ransomware with an encryption process to which we don't have the key. Somebody from outside gets inside and then uses our own encryption techniques and their key to hold us ransom. The second thing that is really important in this area is integrity monitoring. And our product has been in the field for quite a long time, and it does exactly that. It monitors the integrity of your systems. So everybody worries about data recovery, but we also worry about getting your systems back to a trusted state. Because we can identify malware, it's a really good antidote against malware attacks. But it's also very effective if you have insiders that go rogue. So integrity monitoring needs to be another key element in your protection and your defense environment. The third thing is all about recovery and resiliency. And that leads to our GUI, browser-based surgical restore process. That actually comprises a forensics capability, gives you access to information both from FIM Plus and from other tools that you might already have in your environment. But it allows fast situational analysis if there is a successful attack, and recovery in a surgical manner so that we don't see a whole lot of regression. Because it's built in a browser GUI sort of format, it also supports the new generation of support staff that are joining our ranks. So altogether, this spells cyber resiliency to me. 2 ounces of protection and a pound of recovery. As my mother always said, will get you out of almost any jam. Well, my mother never really said that, Reg.
Well, thank you. That's a great introduction, Al. Now, as you and I have both been, mainframe techies for like 3+ decades, we're aware of a whole lot of issues that have not been dealt with to this point. I mean, the very idea that somebody can be going in and literally encrypting, modifying your critical mainframe data real time, and you can actually catch it and do something about it when it happens. Seems to me like a pretty unfamiliar concept, and I'm glad somebody's doing it. How though?
It's very interesting how a terrific defensive technique like encryption can be weaponized. So think about, what are these guys that are trying to attack me? How did they think about a problem? And they kind of go, well, look, we'd like a problem that's easily reversible so we can sell a key back to somebody. And, if they pay us whatever we ask for, a king's ransom being a small part of that, probably not. But if they give us whatever we ask for, we're just going to give them the key back. Then we'll pass control back to them. And that's a real value to them. We don't really want to put the Federal Reserve out of business, because then nobody can pay us. And it ruins the entire operation. So the economics of being a ransom guy kind of go down the tubes. What we're really focused on are these one-off attacks where they're going to create as much damage as they can in the short term, and then they're going to give you a certain amount of relief. So the whole ransomware genre of attack depends on reversibility. So, if I get down the line far enough that I'm going to cause you real and permanent damage, well, we're into vindictiveness. But really, most of these people are now about money. It's a growth part of the GDP in certain parts of the world. And we have to be very cognizant of what we're going to do about that. So my final point on why we care about ransomware, of course, because it's very topical, but realistically, it's really easy to get into that business. I go to the web, I get ransomware as a service software that you don't even have to go to the dark web to get. It's available on the regular web. We do a cost or a value-based share with whoever wrote the software, and by golly, I'm in a new business.
Of course, we in the mainframe have a bit of an advantage. We got sort of security by obscurity that there aren't yet a lot of people writing this stuff for the mainframe. Though if you go to conferences like Share, people are presenting on how it is possible to do ransomware on the mainframe. The funny thing is, I kind of feel like you guys are right out ahead on this one, because I haven't heard of a lot of ransomware things happening on the mainframe yet. But you seem to have done some really careful thinking about what that's going to look like and then preempting it. Maybe if you can sort of talk about what's the trick of catching, of knowing what to look for and catching it as it happens. I mean, yeah, we've got the standard access control. We can make sure you go in with the user ID and password that's trusted to make sure that you don't modify any data sets that you're not allowed to have access to. But what I hear you talking about is actually modifications that a legitimate ID may be making, but that is being misused, and that those modifications are happening real time, and you're actually able to catch them either because they're modifying something sensitive or because they're encrypting it. How on earth do you do that?
So it depends on being a learning system. And that's what FIM Plus does. I mean, it doesn't matter whether it's learning about changes that are going through the system, which would be part of our integrity monitoring solution, or learning about which jobs or which processes are allowed to do encryption. Since we can take a snapshot of all of those ahead of time, and we can see which production jobs are doing encryption and decryption, we can actually then, once we have that list of approved processes, then we can actually say, boy, if it's not the right user that's allowed to use encryption, or it's not the right production process that should be using encryption, then there must be something wrong. Well, that depends on one other thing. You can do this once, and the second somebody actually extends their security and starts to do more encryption, well, I'm going to be out of the water because that one's not going to belong. So we have a process that once we get the alert, we just say, stop everything, stop the alert, stop the encryption from running. I'm going to check and see if this is a legitimate source of encryption, whether it's a legitimate process. I can do that at my leisure, but probably that's going to take a couple of minutes, maybe 5 minutes. But that process that was doing the encryption isn't doing any further damage. It's stopped. So I can actually then decide whether that's a new process that should be allowed, and then I just hit the resume button, or I can say, no, I want this permanently stopped. We have not been able to identify where this is coming from. This is going to take more time. Stop that thing right now. If we actually do the resume function, you get another little option which says, do I want to save the fact that that is now a production job that is further allowed? So assuming I have the right authority in order to do that save function to say this function is okay forever after, then FIM Plus will have learned that that's acceptable. Don't cause an alert based on that. So Reg, I'm going to say one thing to you that almost nobody else in the security business can say: no false positives. They are either these problems occur and they need to be dealt with, or we have learned them and we know that that's just going to cause a lot of false positives if we don't manage that properly. So we manage that properly. Is that kind of
about it? Well, now, I'm thinking about this from a user perspective. And do I understand correctly that there's a graphical element when you say push a button? Is there actually a button that's being pushed here?
Oh, totally. So the new part of this is to apply our existing thinking and process to encryption. That's what's really new today. But for the industry, for the mainframe world as a whole, we invented most of these ideas in our integrity product. So we could actually bring this encryption capability under a full shell that allows us to use a GUI interface. So to your exact point, yes, you can say accept, approve, report. You can get, because on the integrity side, we know what components got changed. We can do a surgical restore so that only the compromised components get recovered. But that doesn't mean, that means that we don't have to recover the components that, maybe in the period of time where a malware attack was taking place. It could be hours, could be days, could be weeks. We can go back in time, get only the compromised components, but all the desired changes, which we learned about on the way through the system, are maintained, and there's no regression. So again, the recovery becomes much more holistic. And that's where we plug in encryption. So another source of alerting capability is encryption. And we had to make a little bit of a change there because we wanted a stop command, but we also wanted a restart command. So those things are available, and they literally are. If I was to show you the user interface today, there would be a button that says, stop and start, basically speaking.
I'm going to dig into the weeds for just a second on this. So you're serving up, if I understand correctly, a web interface from the mainframe. Does that mean you have to involve somebody else's web server, or how do you do that in the simplest, most straightforward manner so that you have somebody with an ongoing graphical terminal that alerts them that they hit stop, that they hit resume? How do you do that as simply as possible?
We struggled with that for a while, to be honest with you, Reg. And we did have, we built our user interface, and then we decided, nope, we wanted to have a ZOS solution that was completely 100% ZOS. We don't want to have either security question marks introduced into this environment by having other platforms. We don't want to have people that need to understand other platforms just to keep our software running. So we wrote our own web server, and we took the existing GUI browser interface and simply plugged it into our ZOS web server. And it worked exactly like it did when we used to pass through the Windows machine that we had previously used. The only thing we noticed was a heck of a lot faster.
Yeah. Okay. So on the one hand, now you've got this lovely new generation compatible graphical interface being served up. On the other hand, of course, one of the issues is that ransomware is going to be coming in through an inappropriately trusted party. In the mainframe, especially, that you're not normally going to have it just popping through a Trojan horse. There's going to be some conscious individual involved, and sometimes they're going to be maybe a new employee or employee who's being turned by a nefarious organization and who's making changes. On the one hand, sure, they might be encrypting stuff as part of the ransomware, but by the time you get to the encryption, they probably made some other changes to critical files in your environment. And those changes might have been a few months ago. So maybe you can just kind of give us a scenario of somebody coming into the environment, starting to lay the groundwork, making the changes, and then beginning the ransomware encryption. Once you become aware of it, how quickly and easily, how do you stop it and how do you undo it?
So typically, what we would deal with is often enough these attacks take a long time to come together. So we knew that initially. And a typical ransomware attack, and I'll just take that as an example, but it applies to pretty much every type of malware. And at some point, in order to attack data, you have to change something somewhere. So we look for changes, but we look for unapproved changes. So as changes are going through your normal deployment approval process, FIM Plus learns those changes. So it means for the first time ever in a ZOS environment, you will have a continuously updated whitelist. That whitelist contains every approved change that went through. Since we are using hashing techniques to actually identify if the module is exactly the same as, we can't be fooled by using the same sort of name. So if I was to replace, IFBR 14 with a version that had a little extra entry point on the back end, and on the 17th of September 2023, it was going to activate. When that gets uploaded to begin with, if IFBR 14 was not in the approved list for the application change or the system change that was going in, we would see that the code doesn't match. So it's a little different way of looking inside the module to make sure things hadn't been changed. So if I was a hacker, I'd try and find something with a really common name, which I thought I could slip through. And then I'd use my own specifications. This is the kind of thing that might happen in applications, but it's the kind of thing, if I was a really smart application guy, I might do to the system guys and kind of kill two birds with one stone, if you get my point. But that's the whole learning process. And if you don't learn as things go along, you will just have an immense number of false positives, because otherwise every change going through the system will trigger an alert. So we always like to say, no extra work. Most of the time, you are not going to have any unauthorized changes. So we are going to report nothing. We are going to say everything was fine. But when we report something, somebody better investigate. And that prevents the usual tiring out of people because the alarm rings, but it doesn't really mean anything.
Now, you talk about hashing this, and I mean, hashing is sort of its own little data science in some ways. Are you using your own algorithm, or are you using published algorithms? How are you going about doing that?
No, actually, it's one of the reasons why we have very little overhead. We assign that responsibility to the crypto card in exactly the same way, and using the standard services that IBM provides in ZOS. So by doing that, much of the overhead that would otherwise be incurred just simply disappears because it doesn't attract CPU time. In fact, one of our best examples is a standard look at an APF list that we have, contains 37,000 members, takes us a third of a CPU second. And if you have customers that don't have a spare third of a CPU second, maybe you should be talking to your complexity management guys.
Now, I got to dig into this a bit deeper, because I just have the sense that what you're doing with the crypto cards is a lot like what some people do with the graphics cards on their PC, where you're really getting some serious, or in fact, it's what some people do with their zip. You're doing with the crypto cards. Like maybe you can just kind of tell us a bit about the fun stuff you're doing to really maximize your value using the crypto cards on the IBM mainframe.
You know, the crypto card is kind of a double-edged sword. On the one side, they do encryption and hashing really, really quickly. So it means if you don't detect an encryption in the first couple of minutes, you're pretty much done anyway. So, you know, our relationship with the crypto card, you might call quite intimate. Even though it's the operating system and ICSF doing all of that processing on our behalf, you know, creating that hash key is ultra important. The hash key gets saved with the data or member name in our vault. It's how we detect changes. So the OS itself, it's one instruction. I can't remember if it's the MK instruction, but it's one instruction to do hashing. And so the overhead of hashing even a large module or perhaps even a backup data set that should not change after it's created, the overhead of creating hash codes for that, it just completely disappears. So, I mean, these are standard operating system techniques. We try to stay to the standard interfaces as much as possible. And it is very interesting how powerful the platform is and how many options there are to use those constructively in your own defense.
Of course, one of the strange weaknesses of the mainframe, and I referred to it earlier, security by obscurity, is that we take for granted that nobody out there knows how to hack the mainframe, how to misuse it, how to do ransomware on it. But you know, part of that is that the mainframe has in the past been seen as something of an island, and that's obviously no longer appropriate because security is an enterprise-wide issue, and we have things like SIMs, you know, and other ways of concentrating and alerting enterprise-wide. How do you play dice with the rest of IT in order to give people a full IT perspective when they're trying to keep track of all the security stuff that's happening at once?
You know, in the old days, the mainframe kind of lost visibility. But you know, if you've been to an ATM recently, or you have a bank balance, or, you know, there are 1,000 other processes that now need instant information, it means your mainframe has to be plugged in a way that it never was before. That opens up a myriad of attack vectors that just didn't exist a few years ago. So we're trying to take, you know, state-of-the-art capability and implement it in a mainframe context. Because, you know, every once in a while, Reg, I have to wrap myself in the flag and I have to say, you know, the mainframe is still the platform on which our Western way of living depends. So when you lose, you know, even a large Windows server or maybe a large Linux server, you just go out and rebuild it, you know, from the software that you can get from the store and a new, you know, chunk of hardware. And, you know, maybe 10 days later, you got that thing running back the way it used to be. That's not really going to work in a mainframe context because now we're connected to every problem that could ever exist. And on top of that, you can't just go get another one. Now, everybody is going to say, oh, that's why I have a disaster recovery site. Well, that's okay for a while. But if you cannot get the infrastructure back, if you can't get the programs back to a trusted level, all that's going to happen is that they're going to reattack you with the same backdoors, with the same capabilities in the area of time bombs and stuff like that. The things they put in your system software level, they're just simply going to reuse those. So if you can recover your data successfully, oh, well, they just encrypt it again. And then you're back in exactly the same spot. So in the mainframe context, we've got a bigger problem than we do in the open systems, and maybe kind of the same problem as they have in the cloud world. How do you recreate trust? And it isn't simply by just restoring your data. It means you got to restore the operation. So, I mean, I don't mean to lecture folks, but this seems to be kind of lost on a lot of people. You know, how do I know what are the bad changes? How do I get them back? How do I not regress a bunch of things? Sure, get my data back. Very, very, very important. But how did it get compromised in the first place? I leave that as an open question.
Well, that's an important set of points about, you know, how the mainframe really is having to play in the same playing field. But a big part of that, of course, is being able to talk nicely to everybody else. You know, having APIs, forwarding its data appropriately. Maybe you can just give a sense of how you interoperate with the various solutions, both custom and industry standard.
Well, to be honest with you, you know, we haven't always been in mainframe. So, like lots of folks, we took a little tour of, you know, the cloud world. Well, really Linux and Windows and the cloud world, and how we should play nicely with in that environment. And the key to how we operate is the REST APIs. So our product is built specifically on REST APIs. So if you want to talk to one FIM plus component and have it talk to another one, we use a REST API to communicate in that level. That means we can talk in the native manner to applications that live in a Linux world. So for instance, if let's say ServiceNow or BMC Helix, you know, Remedy product is running in the cloud somewhere. Now, I don't really know where it is, but that's my change control system. Well, you know, we want to be able to interchange information with that change control system. So that means we have to talk from ZOS to that other platform. And frankly, we don't want to know or care what that other platform is. We just want to query it, get the information that we want from that. So for instance, you know, we might say, is there a change request in place for an update window that's currently open? We might want to check that in, say, ServiceNow. Well, we do a query over there, we get some information back. The information is going to say either that window is open or it is not open. But depending on whether the window is open or not, we would take different action. FIM Plus would take different action. So again, it's a kind of an educational process, but without understanding that there are other tools in the environment that we need information from, like when we go to do the dynamic fetch of SMF information, we don't bring down 100 million records. We know the specific components that we're looking for, and we know the interval because it was okay at this time and not okay now. We know the interval in which that was changed. Therefore, we can do two things. One, we can go get the SMF records that are relevant to only those compromised components during their interval window. So instead of downloading a few billion SMF records or looking at a few 100 million SMF records at best, you're probably going to look at a dozen records. Well, pretty quick, you're going to figure out who did it. And then, of course, one of our other utilities says, oh, well, you know, now that we know who did it, you know, suspend that user ID until we decide we want them doing some more work or whatever, but we're going to limit the damage right now. But we talk to these other tools because they enrich your decision making, and we put all that information in that GUI environment, in that browser environment. So when somebody comes in, they're presented with an awful lot of very focused information about the problem as it exists right now. So that's our value prop. You know, you should be able to solve this much more quickly because you have this breadth of information from other tools and ours. And at the same time, you have capabilities to rectify the problem. So one of the things that we'll do as a result of knowing the compromised components, we can build a recovery JCL for those components and have it waiting for the response team when they want to do the restore. And it can come from, you know, we've got a hierarchy of resources. It could come from HSM, it could come from a DSS backup, it could come from FDR backup, lots of places. But we also know when the components were compromised. That means we know which backup tape to go to. And we can mix and match. So some components might have been changed illegally, you know, several weeks ago. Some might have been changed yesterday. So again, we try to be a holistic solution, and we really work well with the new immutable backups from pretty much all of the vendors. And we do that because it's really important to get the most up-to-date information you can for your data recovery. It is equally as important to get the right and trusted levels of all the components when you're talking about system software or parameter sets or other things that weren't supposed to change. So we'll look after the recovery of the systems. You know, other tools we invoke and we work with hand in hand to do the data recovery.
So this sounds like a complete end-to-end approach. Let me just review what you talked about, and then you can let me know if I've overlooked anything. So you start by basically getting to know the environment, getting to know what the critical data is, getting to know who are the trusted players, getting familiar with the encryption environment, and then also you have the opportunity to let people interface with that using standard API and such. Then you watch real time, and you see if anybody's making an illicit change. Absolute minimization of any possibility of false positives, but catching stuff using crypto card to actually catch things real time in flight, to be able to then alert with a graphical interface and have them click stop or pause or whatever, but also have your SIM catch it, alert that way, and then the ability to go in and actually rebuild the system at any point in time without having to do a roll forward or rebuild everything or restore everything, and have the JCL and other things in place necessary to basically roll back to exactly where you want to be on each individual component rather than just a big single system-wide recovery. What have I overlooked?
That's exactly right, Reg. And I would love to tell you this is all based on artificial intelligence, but this is actually just based on the experience of 30 and 40-year-old guys that have probably been through that process around 10,000 times or so. It's amazing what you learn as you go through that. And one of them is, please do not flood me with false positives. I get tired very easily now at my advanced age. And, you know, I just don't, if I've got a real problem, okay, I'm going to pay attention. And I'm going to start by trying to not get into recovery, because that makes an old man really tired. So what are we going to do? Where do we really focus? Prevent. Don't have a problem in the first place. You know, honestly, we didn't invent any of these ideas about how we should operate. If you look at the NIST cybersecurity framework, NIST is a wonderful pattern for the kinds of things that you should do. And they start with protect and they move into detect, and then they kind of go, well, you got to have, you know, some response, and then you got to be able to recover. And, you know, the new term for that probably is resiliency. We used to have an old term for that. We used to call it continuous operation. Our job is to keep people running. And we've been doing that from the availability standpoint, and that's what mainframes do very, very well. We've all been doing that from that standpoint for a long time. We're just applying the same techniques to security.
Now, that is outstanding and clearly an essential innovation, or more accurately, set of breakthroughs that MainTegrity has accomplished for today's mainframe security context. It really matters to have game-changing solutions like this one on the mainframe and across IT. Thank you all for this insightful conversation.
Reg, I can't say enough about professionals like you and the value you bring to the environment. You know, we do our job, which is software innovation. We think we do it well. We think we are bringing new solutions that have never existed on any platform before. And we think that the mainframe world deserves that. Thanks for your time, Reg.
We encourage our viewers to check out the MainTegrity website and contact them to quickly prove this technology in your own shops. This is definitely an important and timely opportunity. I'm Reg Harbeck.